Veganism is commonly characterized as a cult. Is this a valid observation or a gross mischaracterization? In this video, I'll be analyzing veganism using the BITE model, developed by author and mental health counselor Stephen Hassan, who specializes in cult mind control. B stands for behavioral control, I for information control, T for thought control, and E for emotional control. On Hassan's website, Freedom of Mind, he uses the following color code in his assessment. Green means does not apply, orange means it partially applies, and red means it absolutely applies. I added a fourth category, represented in blue, which means it applies to carnism, the antithesis of veganism. Before we dive in, it's important to note Hassan's statement regarding mind control. Destructive mind control can be determined when the overall effect of these four components promotes dependency and obedience to some leader or cause. It is not necessary for every single item on the list to be present. Like many techniques, it is not inherently good or evil. If mind control techniques are used to empower an individual to have more choice, and authority for their life remains within themselves, the effects can be beneficial. For example, benevolent mind control can be used to help people quit smoking without affecting any other behavior. Mind control becomes destructive when it undermines a person's ability to think and act independently. Alright, let's get into it. Part 1. Behavioral control. Number 1. Regulate individuals' physical reality. This is kind of vague, but I'm going to say no. 2. Dictate where, how, and with whom the member lives and associates. No. 3. When, how, and with whom the member has sex. No. 4. Control types of clothing and hairstyles. While veganism does dictate that you not support industries that exploit animals for clothing and accessories, it does not control how you dress or present yourself. Leather, wool, fur, and down are not vegan, but vegans are free to wear out old items and shop secondhand. Some hair products and dyes are tested on animals, but you are still free to style and color your hair however you please with cruelty-free products. 5. Regulate diet, food and drink, hunger, and/or fasting. Veganism certainly has dietary implications, but as with clothing, veganism only dictates that you not support industries that exploit animals for food. It does not control what you eat, when you eat, how much you eat, etc. You are free to eat a wide variety of food, healthy or unhealthy, and you are free to consume caffeine and alcohol. You can fast if you choose to. Since dietary modification is the largest component of veganism, I would say that this applies more so than number 4, but this quality alone is not deterministic of something being a cult. If it were, an eating disorder recovery program would be a cult. 6. Manipulation and deprivation of sleep. No. 7. Financial exploitation, manipulation, or dependence. No. 8. Restrict leisure, entertainment, vacation time. No. 9. Major time spent with group indoctrination and rituals and/or self-indoctrination, including the internet. No. You can be as involved or uninvolved in the vegan scene as you choose. There are no rituals, and veganism involves unlearning indoctrination by carnism. 10. Permission required for major decisions. No. 11. Thoughts, feelings, and activities of self and others reported to superiors. No. 12. Rewards and punishments used to modify behaviors, both positive and negative. No. 13. Discourage individualism, encourage groupthink. No. Vegans have heated disagreements. Of course, there will be some level of groupthink within any social justice movement, as conformity is a natural human tendency. But it's interesting to note that nearly half of vegans are not religious, perhaps because social movements at their early stages tend to attract nonconformists and freethinkers. 14. Impose rigid rules and regulations. It's true that veganism requires adhering to certain rules, but within the definition there is a qualifier as far as possible and practicable. This leaves room for flexibility, an antonym for rigidity. Individual vegans may impose rigid rules on themselves and others, but they have no authority and do not represent the whole. 15. Punish disobedience by beating, torture, burning, cutting, rape, or tattooing/branding. Of course, these are not methods used by carnists to punish vegans, but beating, torture, burning, cutting, rape, and tattooing and branding are all done to non-human animals. The latter 5 are standard industry practice. Vegans are fighting against this barbarism. 16. Threaten to harm family and friends. No. 17. Force individual to rape or be raped. In order to produce milk, dairy cows are artificially inseminated, meaning they are restrained against their will in a device known as a rape rack. And no, vegans did not come up with this term, and have a fistful of bull semen shoved up their vaginas. Sounds like a pretty disgusting cult ritual to me. 18. Instill dependency and obedience. No, there is no leader we must obey, only a principle we must adhere to if we want to live in alignment with our values. 19. Encourage and engage in corporal punishment. No. Part 2. Information control. This involves, number 1, deception. A. Deliberately withhold information. This most certainly applies to carnism. The animal agriculture industries, zoos, aquariums, etc., deliberately withhold information from consumers because if people knew the truth, it would hurt their profit. Industry executives have lobbied to pass ag-gag laws, which make it illegal for whistleblowers to release footage of what happens inside these facilities. Factory farms, slaughterhouses, and animal research labs are often inconspicuous, located in rural areas, out of sight, out of mind. Paul McCartney once said, "If slaughterhouses had glass walls, we'd all be vegetarian." B. Distort information to make it more acceptable. This is done with labels such as free range, cage-free, and humanely raised, and images of green pasture and happy animals on the packaging. In reality, free range means they must have access to the outdoors, which can mean a tiny fenced-in area attached to a giant warehouse packed with hundreds or thousands of animals. Cage-free chickens are only marginally better off. They are still crammed in dingy warehouses with little space to move around. And humanely raised is meaningless, as the word humane is defined as having or showing compassion or benevolence. Needlessly slaughtering animals is neither compassionate nor benevolent, and there is nothing humane about an inherently exploitative relationship. C. Systematically lie to the cult member. Consumers are systematically lied to via ad campaigns such as "milk does a body good," when in reality, cow's milk is correlated with negative health outcomes. We are told outright and through subliminal messaging that eating animals is normal, natural, and necessary. We are told we need milk for strong bones and meat for building muscle. We are told that a vegan diet is deficient in iron, omega-3s, and B12, despite there being non-animal sources of these nutrients. Lies on top of lies on top of lies. None of these apply to veganism. While vegans are human and get shit wrong from time to time, we do not need to withhold information, lie, or distort the truth, because the truth is on our side. We encourage people to do their own research because the best evidence supports veganism. 2. Minimize or discourage access to non-cult sources of information, including A. Internet, TV, radio, books, articles, newspapers, magazines, and other media. No. Of course, it's upsetting when people spread misinformation because many people will accept it blindly. But an honest look at all of the information will lead a person to veganism, so I wouldn't discourage someone from hearing out all sides. B. Critical information. No. C. Former members. No. D. Keep members busy so they don't have time to think and investigate. No. E. Control through cell phone with texting, calls, and internet tracking. No. 3. Compartmentalize information into outsider versus insider doctrines. A. Ensure that information is not freely accessible. No. B. Control information at different levels and missions within the group. No. C. Allow only leadership to decide who needs to know what and when. No. 4. Encourage spying on members. A. Impose a buddy system to monitor and control member. No. B. Report deviant thoughts, feelings, and actions to leadership. No. C. Ensure that individual behavior is monitored by the group. To an extent, the vegan police are out here keeping tabs, but again, they have no real authority. And while this type of social monitoring occurs, I wouldn't say it's encouraged. 5. Extensive use of cult-generated information and propaganda, including A. Newsletters, magazines, journals, audio tapes, videotapes, YouTube, movies, and other media. Vegan newsletters, magazines, documentaries, YouTube videos, and billboards are vastly outnumbered by carnist content, and they seek to expose carnist propaganda. Although inaccurate information occasionally spreads through vegan media, in comparison to carnist media, it is insignificant. B. Misquoting statements or using them out of context from non-cult sources. This happens all the time, notably from people like Chris Kresser, who make false health claims regarding plant-based diets. They'll misquote research that actually supports the claim they're trying to refute. 6. Unethical use of confession. A. Information about sins used to disrupt and/or dissolve identity boundaries. No. B. Withholding forgiveness or absolution. No. C. Manipulation of memory, possible false memories. No. Part 3. Thought control. 1. Require members to internalize the group's doctrine as truth. A. Adopting the group's map of reality as reality. Carnism requires people to internalize its lies as truth, and instills a map of reality that does not match reality. B. Instill black and white thinking. No. There is nuance within the realms of ethics and nutrition, but some things are black and white. You're not necessarily engaged in black and white thinking by acknowledging this and rejecting the middle ground position. To say that nothing is black and white is inherently contradictory, and the middle is not always the reasonable or ethical place to stand. C. Decide between good versus evil. This is true if we're talking about the system of animal oppression. It is fair to say that the industries that exploit animals are evil. But most vegans recognize that the average consumer is not evil. I have in-laws who are dairy farmers, and while I'm disgusted and saddened by the industry they take part in, I do not view them as pure evil. D. Organize people into us versus them. This partially applies because, as with any political movement, this mentality can develop. 2. Change person's name and identity. No. 3. Use of loaded language and cliches, which constrict knowledge, stop critical thoughts, and reduce complexities into platitudinous buzzwords. Of course, you could find examples of vegans using loaded language and cliches, but in this context, it is not used to constrict knowledge or stop critical thoughts. Carnism, on the other hand, employs loaded language for this purpose all the time, especially through advertising. Think back to those deceitful labels such as humanely raised, grass-fed, and organic. These phrases are meant to elicit positive feelings and ease the conscience of the consumer. Carnists use thought-terminating cliches such as, "It's my personal choice. Stop forcing your beliefs on me. Vegans are so judgmental. We've been eating meat for thousands of years. Lions, though. Bacon, though. Not everyone has the privilege to be vegan. God put animals on this earth for us to eat. Plants feel pain too, and we can agree to disagree," in order to quell their cognitive dissonance. Believing animals are sentient beings who deserve respect and fair treatment, and believing you are justified in exploiting and killing animals are two conflicting beliefs that create cognitive dissonance. 4. Encourage only good and proper thoughts. No, there is no vegan God judging you for thought crime. 5. Hypnotic techniques used to alter mental states, undermine critical thinking, and even to age regress the member. No. 6. Memories are manipulated and false memories are created. No. 7. Teaching thought-stopping techniques which shut down reality testing by stopping negative thoughts and allowing only positive thoughts, including A. Denial, rationalization, justification, and wishful thinking. Well, we already went over this. Carnists most certainly deny reality, attempt to rationalize and justify their behavior, and engage in wishful thinking. They envision the animals they consume on idyllic green pasture, living happy lives until one day they are knocked unconscious without expecting a thing and sent to the butcher. Dairy cows just naturally produce milk for us. No need to be impregnated over and over again and have their babies stolen from them. They just make milk. And they're happy to be milked by farmers because it's the only way to provide them relief. Animal farmers are doing a noble service, providing nutritious food for people. This is a fantasy. B. Chanting, no. Meditating, no. Praying, no. Speaking in tongues, no. Singing or humming? No. 8. Rejection of rational analysis, critical thinking, and constructive criticism. Veganism is a position reached by deploying rational analysis and critical thinking. Carnism is upheld by the rejection of rational analysis and critical thinking. Most people were not born vegan. Carnism is the default. People do not arrive at the conclusion that exploiting animals is normal, natural, and necessary after considered thought. It is ingrained in us since birth. 9. Forbid critical questions about the leader, doctrine, or policy allowed. No. 10. Labeling alternative belief systems as illegitimate, evil, or not useful. Okay, yes, this most certainly applies. Carnism is illegitimate, evil, and useless. 11. Instill new map of reality. The map of reality instilled in us since birth does not match actual reality. This is the premise of Melanie Joy's TED Talk on Carnism, which I highly recommend. Part 4. Emotional control. 1. Manipulate and narrow the range of feelings. Some emotions and/or needs are deemed as evil, wrong, or selfish. No. 2. Teach emotion-stopping techniques to block feelings of homesickness, anger, and doubt. One emotion-suppressing technique is the categorization of certain animals as pets, aka friends or family, and other animals as food. This objectification of certain species allows people to dial down their empathy. Many farmers use numbers rather than names for their animals because naming them individualizes them. We refer to animals as it instead of he, she, or they to otherize them. We use euphemisms to describe animal products. Beef instead of cow flesh, pork instead of pig flesh. This is done to block feelings of empathy, which produce anger and doubt. 3. Make the person feel that problems are always their own fault, never the leader's or the group's fault. Vegans do blame those who quit for having weakness of will and succumbing to societal pressure. Whatever difficulties one may face as a vegan can be overcome, and we owe it to the animals to persist and fight for them. It's not the fault of veganism for one's personal failure to stick to it. That said, I don't think it's fair to place all of the blame on the individual, especially individuals who have more barriers. It's more useful and accurate to blame the system. And I don't think that vegans are beyond reproach. Certain figures in the vegan movement are toxic and at least partly to blame for alienating people. 4. Promote feelings of guilt or unworthiness, such as A. Identity guilt. I'm not quite sure what this means, but I'm assuming by identity he means characteristics such as gender, sexual orientation, race, religion, and class. In which case, no, veganism does not promote identity guilt. B. You are not living up to your potential. No. Your family is deficient. No. Your past is suspect. No. Past complicity in carnism is forgiven. Your affiliations are unwise. No. Most vegans have non-vegan friends and family. Your thoughts, feelings, and actions are irrelevant or selfish. If you choose to eat animal products knowing the harm, your actions are selfish, and your feelings are irrelevant. Animals are being murdered by the trillions. But again, there is no vegan god judging you for thought crime, and if you fuck up, it's okay. Contrary to popular belief, most vegans are pretty forgiving. Social guilt. To some degree, yes, but I would argue that reasonable doses of guilt and shame are important for social cohesion and moral progress. Historical guilt. No. Isn't this the same as D? 5. Instill fear, such as fear of A. Thinking independently. No, not generally. B. The outside world. No. Enemies. No. Losing one's salvation. No. Leaving or being shunned by the group. It's true that influencers and celebrities who come out as no longer vegan face a lot of criticism and backlash, but most of the criticism is valid. If you're a part of any political or religious group and you abandon the ideology of that group for the opposing one, you're going to lose friends. We all seek friendships with people who share our values, and our friendships fade as our values change. The point is, shunning is not inherently bad. It depends on the context. What makes religious cults stand out is the severity of shunning, the total excommunication of family members. We don't really see shunning to this degree in the vegan movement. Expressing disapproval is not the same as disowning. People act like unsubscribing from someone's YouTube channel and voicing disappointment when they announce they're no longer vegan is akin to disowning a family member and refusing to speak to them. Another key difference is the reason behind the shunning. Shunning someone for willingly perpetuating violence towards animals by abandoning veganism is a lot more reasonable than shunning someone for having doubts about the invisible sky daddy. Fear of others' disapproval. This is no more true of veganism than of other social movements. 6. Extremes of emotional highs and lows. Love bombing and praise one moment, and then declaring you're a horrible sinner. No. 7. Ritualistic and sometimes public confession of sins. No. 8. Phobia indoctrination. Inculcating irrational fears about leaving the group or questioning the leader's authority. No, there is no authority figure. No happiness or fulfillment possible outside of the group. No, you can be happy as a carnist, but what about the victims? There is no happiness or fulfillment for the trillions of animals we exploit and kill every year outside of veganism. Terrible consequences if you leave. Hell, demon possession, incurable diseases, accidents, suicide, insanity, 10,000 reincarnations, etc. No. Shunning of those who leave. Fear of being rejected by friends and family. We already talked about this. Never a legitimate reason to leave. Those who leave are weak, undisciplined, unspiritual, worldly, brainwashed by family or counselor, or seduced by money, sex, or rock and roll. Facts. But you're free to have all the sex and rock and roll. And lastly, threats of harm to ex-member and family. No. Of course you can find a handful of empty threats on the internet, but it goes both ways. Vegan activists receive death threats from carnists all the time. And we've reached the end. Let's review the qualities that apply or partially apply to veganism versus the qualities that apply to carnism, shall we? Which would you say more closely resembles a cult? The group that views its opposing ideology as illegitimate and evil, and therefore believes there is never a good reason to abandon it, shuns those who do to some degree, requires a few behavioral modifications to be a part of the group, and is somewhat susceptible to an us versus them mentality. Or the group that beats, tortures, burns, cuts, and rapes billions of sentient beings, relies on deception, propaganda, and the distortion of truth, requires the suppression of empathy, engages in the denial of reality, rationalization, justification, and wishful thinking, and rejects critical thinking. Yeah, I'm gonna go with the second group. Recall earlier what Hassan said about mind control. It becomes destructive when it undermines a person's ability to think rationally and act independently. Although some characteristics of the bite model apply to veganism, it is evident when examined as a whole that veganism does not fit the criteria of a cult. It does not undermine one's ability to think rationally or act independently. In fact, it is critical thinking and questioning the status quo that lead people to veganism. Thank you so much for watching, and if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, and consider sharing it. Alright, peace out.
Yo, how when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them say me no eat no fish, no meat now. How when me eat them, I wonder when me yam. When me tell them say that I'm a vegan man. How when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them